Chairman, Members Committee. Don't see my side up here, but I assume they'll get down here soon enough. House Bill 401 is a very important bill. This is a bill that, in essence, I've introduced a couple times now. It's a non-discrimination bill. That's what the bill does. To paraphrase Martin Luther King Jr., you should be judged by the content of your character and not by the color of your skin. And it's true in race, it's true in color, it's true in religion, national origin. It's also certainly true with regards to sexual orientation or gender identity. The bill prohibits discrimination in employment, public housing, public contracting, apprenticeship programs, housing, banking, and insurance. It's a comprehensive bill. It's one that we hope we never have to come back for. The essence of this bill is whether or not this discrimination should be lawful. And I think, as we've learned from the civil rights movement, that once you prohibit discrimination, it allows people to fully participate in the public sphere, to get jobs, to live places. We should be judging employees based on what are their good employees. Allow the good ones, fire the bad ones. Their sexual orientation is irrelevant to how well they do their job. We should be allowing people to live in places or not live in places. Do they pay their rent? Are they good tenants? Should they be able to buy? These again are not based on their gender identity, but whether or not they should be able to buy. We have been slowly taking discrimination out of the public sphere. It's time that we close it. And let me just say this, you're going to hear, I'm sure, from a number of people who've been discriminated against. As an openly gay man, I know hundreds of these stories I've heard through my life. People who were not given a job because they're gay. People who were kicked out of a house because of their gender identity. And they're really very powerful stories. They're very painful stories. And I know every one of you here. I think y'all are fair-minded people. And I can't imagine any of you discriminating against someone based on something, a characteristic. You should, again, hire people based on how good a job they do. Let people live where they want to live and not base it on these things. It's a fundamental fairness bill. You're going to be hearing a lot of stories, I'm sure, from a lot of people, but I do want to plead with the committee. This is an idea, I think, whose time has come. I think it's all over across the country. I think it's bipartisan. I think it's young and old, particularly, though, young people, the new generations, they don't have a problem with someone's sexual orientation or gender identity. They say, live and let live, and I truly hope it will be, this committee will take an historic step and pass this bill out of subcommittee. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Delegate. We just kind of like to ask any of the members have questions for the patron. Thank you, Delegate Levine. Let me see. The next bill we're going to have up is Delegate Guzman.
It's about the same issue because I know we have people who want to testify in favor of the bill.
We're going to take all of the public comment all at one.
Fair enough.
Delegate Guzman's not here.
I assume she'll make it maybe during the public comment. Maybe she'll show.
Okay, we'll just hold on just now. I believe I saw Senator Abbott. Very good. Good to see you, Senator.
Great to see you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. I feel like it's, as Yogi Berra would say, it's deja vu all over again. Once again, we're here in Richmond, and once again, we have a non-discrimination and public employment bill before the members of this subcommittee. Every year, it gets more and more universally accepted, as Doug Levine was saying, to have non-discrimination policies. And this is the simplest and most basic and ought to be the least controversial of any of these bills that you hear. Right now, for the last 4 out of the last 5 governors, we've had a non-discrimination policy in state hiring, and the sky has not fallen. The Commonwealth has not been subject to a raft of litigation. All it's done is give our state employees some dignity, some certainty, and also it sets a positive tone for our Commonwealth. We know that Fortune 500 companies are that they have these policies, and further, we know that each of the 19 Fortune 500 companies in Virginia have a policy against discriminating against sexual orientation or gender identity. All qualified Virginians should be treated fairly and equally, particularly as SB 202 covers in matters of employment. It, as I said, brings into the code the executive order of the previous governors, including the current governor. I always find people who are surprised that the other categories are not even included in the code as well, such as veterans, pregnancy, national origin, race, religion, color, childbirth-related medical conditions, disability, and so forth in the code. It's time, and I hope that you'll have a full and fair discussion. And a few years ago, you sent this off to the Code Commission for some reason, feeling that you needed to ask the Code Commission if it was appropriate. The Code Commission came back and told you all that it was your decision, the policies of the Commonwealth of Virginia. The Senate voted a few weeks ago on a vote of 29 to 10 for this policy. And we had all kinds of senators, every Democrat, but of the Republicans, we had Republicans from Augusta to Chesapeake to Fauquier to every region of the Commonwealth. And I hope it's time that we'll catch up and move into this century. And I really look forward to your questions. I hope if you can't support this, that you'll at least take the time to ask the questions that you have trouble with rather than avoid this common sense policy. Thank you.
Thank you, Cindy. I know do any of the members have a question on Patriot?
I do.
Doug Rogers.
I noticed we've added the status of veteran. Do we have an example of veteran who's been turned down on the job status because of the veteran status?
Thank you for asking that, because I think it's important. It's not whether anyone was turned down for a job. It's whether or not we want to protect all people. We don't want someone because they deploy, or a veteran, I should say, someone stigmatized because they are a veteran, but we should protect every Virginian. The point of this bill is, I want every Virginian who works for state or local government to be charged solely on the basis of their qualification and what they bring to the job, veteran or not.
Thank you, Senator. Any other questions for the Patriot? Dr. Pease.
Yeah, thank you very much. Senator Hammond, good afternoon. Wanted to see if you could describe what the current status of federal law is, particularly in case law that may be before the Supreme Court or in courts of appeals across the nation. Do we have anything settled as it relates to these various subjects?
No, I think as chairman of the larger committee knows, the Supreme Court, to my knowledge, has never ruled on this particular topic because there's no statute. Congress has not passed it. But if you polled most Americans, they would think that it has passed. It passed, I think it was the U.S. Senate once, but not the House of Representatives. Although there's a huge number of Republicans and Democrats at the federal level on record in support of these protections. Think about it this way. If you were gay or lesbian, should you be allowed to serve in this body? Think about it that way.
Thank you, Senator. Is there any other questions?
I guess that means we're going to pass the bill, so I thank you for that.
Thank you, Senator. We're going to just break this slightly from from the agenda, and we have had a request, Delegate Guzman to just strike the bill at the request of the Patriot. So I will entertain a motion. Second. All those in can't you go electronic voting machine?
I'm going to volunteer you to be a sub. Okay.
Close polls. The bill is stricken 7-0. Moving right along, we have Delegate Simon and Senator Waxman. We have, I think, identical bills.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman. Parliamentary inquiry. I see the delegate pieces here, and I just want to make sure I understand. So the way we do subcommittees, you sort of sit ex officio, but you wouldn't vote unless somebody on your side was missing. Is that right?
That is accurate, Mr. Chairman.
Doug Simon knows the rules very well.
Absolutely, he is very good with the rules.
So, Mr. Chairman, I would note that Delegate Ward was excused today when we met at the floor, for excused absence. And I would notice that, I know you can't sub for her, but we've got Delegate Jones here sitting at the end of the dais. And I know that as chairman of the committee, I think you have the right to appoint subcommittee members. Maybe you could appoint an emergency substitution there for Delegate Ward.
Mr. Chairman, Delegate Simon, I appreciate the gentleman's creativity. I know that my actions would also bind or potentially bind other committees and set precedents, so I'll decline to do so.
All right, well, I figured it was worth a shot, Mr. Chairman. Maybe not. So, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, we're here for my House bill is 300, which is, for this bill would add sexual orientation and gender identity to the list of protected classes under Virginia's Fair Housing
Now,
Act.
hold me just a second, Doug's.
I'm sorry, I lied. It's House Bill 1547.
1547, thank you.
It was House Bill 300 last time I did it, and so we didn't update the heading on my, talking points. But see, I have these same talking points because I've introduced this bill. I think this will be my 5th session. It'll be the 4th time I've introduced a bill to do this, so I think we're making progress. So what this bill does simply is add sexual orientation and gender identity to the list of protected classes under Virginia's Fair Housing Statute. I would note that the National Association of Realtors Code of Ethics some years ago added gender identity and sexual orientation to their list of protected classes so that if someone were discriminated on that basis, a realtor who's a member of the Realtor Association, they'd be subject to discipline under the Code of Ethics. So in some ways, by not having this as part of our Fair Housing Statute, we actually disadvantage members of the Realtor Association by actually holding them to a different standard and giving folks that are discriminated against by a realtor a different cause of action. It's not available to licensees that don't join the Realtor Association. So I don't think that that's a good policy, and a policy we ought to be following there. As far as the realtor, and in fact, this is one of those bills that 5 years ago, when I first introduced it, the Realtor Association opposed, but they've since come around in response to the change in their membership, and they've decided this is something that they want to embrace. And they, in fact, I think will be speaking in support of this bill when you guys decide to take public comment on this. Some of the objections I've heard in the past, is this in fact a problem? Has anybody ever been discriminated against on the basis of their sexual orientation? So a group called Housing Opportunities Made Equal did a study after hearing those questions, and they found that in fact there is discrimination that happens. They sent some testers out, they did some test cases. They found that folks that identified themselves as a same-sex couple shopping for a house experienced discrimination at higher rates than people that identified themselves as a traditional married couple. So we know that it's actually a problem. It does happen. We haven't had lots of complaints about it because it's not actionable yet. So I hate complaining about something that's not very good conduct under Virginia's Fair Housing Statute. You all, I heard today on the floor, are the party of millennials. You care very much about millennials and how we tax Uber and Netflix and all those things. I will tell you that polling shows that this is actually an issue that's really sort of a non-issue for most millennial voters. They don't understand what the big deal is anymore. They expect that by now we ought to be extending these sorts of protections to the LGBT community. They don't think that same-sex marriage is a big deal. They think that this is something that, again, frankly, I think many millennials are surprised we don't offer this protection to members of the LGBT community. I teach this fair housing in my profession. My realtors are surprised, again, that it's not covered under Virginia's code. It is in DC, it is in Maryland, so my folks that do business in multiple jurisdictions have to follow a different set of rules in different places, so this would make us consistent with what a lot of the country is doing. It's the right thing to do, members. It is absolutely the right thing to do for Virginia. You know, we are bidding right now. One of a number of companies is bidding for Amazon's second headquarters. We just landed in Nessa. We have an opportunity here to demonstrate to the country and the world that Virginia is a place that is open to all of our talented workers and employees, and we don't discriminate against people on their color, their religion, their race, their national origin, or who they choose to love and marry. I think it's important that we use this opportunity, this hearing, to send a message that Virginia is open for business, it's open to all, and that we are a company that, rather a state that is ready to move into the 21st century and attract these 21st century businesses. I thank the committee for their time. Now we'll defer to that.
Senator Waxman, we have Senate Bill 423.
Senate Bill 423. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Y'all have a very interesting way of doing things over here on this side of the Capitol. But I think Delegate Simon has addressed a lot of the issues with this bill, but it's important to remember who this does not apply to, okay? It does not apply to landlords with fewer than 3 rental units. It doesn't apply to folks who are renting out rooms, like their basement or rooms in the dwelling that they already occupy. It doesn't apply to religious organizations that are parsonage houses. We're really talking about those who are in the business of renting out properties, commercial properties. And a person's sexual orientation or their gender identity has nothing to do with whether they're gonna pay their rent on time, whether they're gonna be a good tenant and a good neighbor. And those are the things that should go into decisions about whether or not to rent to people. And as the point has already been made, as we're seeking to attract businesses to Virginia, this is one of the things that they look for. I mean, I also have been carrying this bill for a number of years, and it's interesting to me because the number of Fortune 500 companies that have protections, anti-discrimination policies for same-sex members of their workforce has been in the mid-90s for quite some time. And when I first started carrying this bill, it was about 2/3 for gender identity, and now that is up into the mid-80s as well. And that's for the Fortune 500, which are the old guard. The anti-discrimination policies are even higher among new tech companies and those kinds of companies. If employers think that their employees are going to run the risk of being discriminated against when they go to find housing, a basic human necessity, a basic need for their workforce, they're not going to want to come to Virginia, and it puts us at a competitive disadvantage. I hope that you will at least use a business case of why it is necessary that we have these protections in our code. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Are there any questions for Senator Waxman? Hearing none, I'm going to ask for public comment now. I guess maybe we should have the proponents come first. And again, let's just say this: we have another subcommittee after this, and then the full committee has to meet. So please, in the interest of time, if it'd be nice if maybe people didn't all get up and say the same thing, and or just try to move it along as quickly as possible. And I appreciate that. Thank you. Yes, sir.
Mr. Chairman, James Parrish with Equality Virginia, and I respect that, but I do think we have a lot of people who came in the last minute with this committee was scheduled yesterday, so if you are in support of these 4 bills, please stand while I make this statement. Mr. Chairman, members of committee, what is taking place today is an alarming effort to vote down basic fairness legislation that has broad support. We have a committee hastily scheduled by leadership with the sole purpose of stopping legislation that most of the General Assembly agrees with. Many of you know that Equality Virginia values its pragmatic reputation, and our approach involves trying to find consensus from both parties to pass common sense legislation. On this legislation, we have found consensus, and it's common sense. And that's because I don't think any of the delegates here today would be willing to argue that the government, that Virginia, should be able to discriminate against gay and transgender Virginians. Which is why this process and the vote you've been instructed to take is all the more painful for me. I know many of you, and I know how you actually feel about these issues. You've told me privately, or I've heard from one of your friends, family members, or business partners. So I can't fathom how you can look at me today and take a vote that would allow me to be fired from a government job or denied a home. So yes, this process is personal, and we will not let the procedural minutia distract Virginians from what Speaker Cox, Delegate Hugo, and Delegate Gilbert are doing today. If you vote to pass by, you are endorsing the firing of the state employees simply because of who they are. If you vote to pass by, you are enabling those who would deny your constituents a home because of who they are. How will you explain this vote? Every one of you has gay or transgender family members, friends, or constituents who you promised to represent. There's no good explanation here because Virginians have already moved on. While the majority of members of this committee have been given orders to use procedural tools to kill this bipartisan legislation, you are only delaying the inevitable on an issue that's already been decided. It's been decided by our statewide elections since 2009 when only people who support LGBT people have won. It's been decided by Republican voters, by a bipartisan supermajority in the Senate, and by the business community. It has been decided in the hearts of Virginians, and our supporters will only continue to grow. Equality Virginia has always found a way to work with both Democrats and Republicans. But it is impossible to find common ground in the General Assembly when the leadership of the House is so afraid of a floor vote that they will move procedural mountains to satisfy the whims of a tiny faction. What are Speaker Cox, Delegate Hugo, and Delegate Gilbert afraid of? Why have they instructed you to kill these bills today? Thank you.
Thank you. Can you identify yourself, please?
Yes, my name is Carol Shaw. My wife, Mary Townley, and I were plaintiffs in the Bostic case that went to the Supreme Court and led to marriage for same-sex families in Virginia. I'm speaking in support of these bills for my family, for my friends, for my neighbors, and for my community, because this is common sense legislation. The majority of Virginians across Virginia, across both parties, support these protections. When these bills were passed by bipartisan support, these protections increase the desirability of Virginia for businesses to come here and to make Virginia a more fair place. All of Virginia is watching all of you today. You have the choice to be on the right side of history. You have the choice to truly represent all of Virginia's citizens. These bills move us ever closer to truly embodying our great motto. I hope that all of you will support these common sense bills and finally make Virginia a place for lovers of equality. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And yes, ma'am, can you identify yourself, please?
So, Mr. Chairman, members of the subcommittee, Mary Brisbane, on behalf of the Virginia Fair Housing Office at the Department of Professional and Occupational Regulation, the administration strongly supports this legislation. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, ma'am, can you identify yourself, please?
Hi, I'm Sarah Wilson. I'm the agency head for the Virginia Department of Human Resource Management, and the administration strongly supports the fair and non-discriminatory bill.
Thank you. Yes, sir.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman and members of the subcommittee. My name is Brian Koziel. I'm the Director of Research at Housing Opportunities Made Equal, or also known as HOME. Our mission is to ensure equal housing access to all Virginians. I'm here today to urge you to support legislation which would prohibit discrimination based on sexual orientation or gender identity under the Virginia Fair Housing Law. According to the Department of Housing and Urban Development, 22 other states offer these protections, including our neighbors in Maryland and the District of Columbia. These protections are sorely needed in Virginia. In 2014 and 2015, HOME conducted a research project that included match-paired email tests in the rental markets in Richmond, Hampton Roads, and Northern Virginia. In 44% of these comparable tests, those tests in which the same rental agent responded to both testers, same-sex couples were treated worse than different-sex couples. For example, a straight couple was offered an appointment, but the gay couple was not. Gay couple was told about a special, the straight couple, a gay couple was not told about a special, the straight couple was told about. And the straight couple was encouraged to apply online, while the gay couple was not. Our look at this early part of the rental process uncovered differences that suggest larger differences could occur later in the process or even during tenancy. An argument against this bill that you'll likely hear is that since there are few, if any, complaints on record, that it's not a problem. This argument is hollow. People know they have no recourse. People know that they are not protected. People know that there's nothing they can do. This leads to a culture of silence that obscures the problem. There's a growing body of research conducted here in Virginia as well as across the country that shows that housing discrimination based on sexual orientation and gender identity is widespread. When someone experiences housing discrimination, they suffer both economic and emotional harm. It can lead to longer and more expensive housing searches, homelessness, and ongoing emotional trauma. To be denied a basic necessity because of who you are is something that nobody should have to experience. Victims of discrimination deserve a way to hold accountable those who have caused them harm. One's sexual orientation or gender identity is completely irrelevant when it comes to paying the rent or being a good neighbor. People should be able to seek and qualify for the housing of their choice, not have their options unfairly limited by stereotypes and prejudice. In closing, I urge you to support legislation that will make Virginia a place where everyone's right to housing is protected, because who you love or how you identify should not limit where you can live. Thank you.
Thanks, sir.
Claire Guthrie Gastignano on behalf of the ACLU of Virginia and its 42,000 members. We strongly support all of this legislation, but I wanted to bring a personal perspective to at least one aspect to it. When you think about these issues, I bet you're not thinking about the military. And I bet you're not thinking about what this means when the military starts to make decisions about things like aircraft carriers and BRAC and all of the rest of that. But you should be. I mean, I'm old enough to remember when my dad was a 4-star general, when the military in the Washington area declared certain apartment complexes off limits because they were continuing to discriminate against black people when it came to rentals. And it is not beyond the possibility that commanders down the bases in Hampton Roads and elsewhere in Virginia may be asked by the people in their commands to begin to start to do something about discrimination by declaring different housing units and different housing apartment complexes in different places that are discriminating off limits to all military personnel. But you're sending a message to all Virginians, and you're sending a message particularly to military members and their families who live here, that this is not a welcoming place, that this is not an inclusive place, and this is not a good place for the military to be located in a circumstance in which its members cannot expect not to be discriminated against in the public sphere, whether it's public accommodations or housing or job opportunities for their spouses. So I would strongly encourage you to support this legislation. It's the right thing to do. And to answer one question that someone asked about the federal law, let's be clear. Our state statute imports automatically any federal civil rights law that's passed. So you're going to confront this one way or another one day, with whether you like to or not, because if the federal law changes, so will our state statute. But you shouldn't be waiting for that time. You should be leading the Commonwealth toward inclusion and opportunity and voting in favor of these bills. Thank you.
Thank you, and I want to ask the other folks who will speak against to kind of maybe just kind of shorten their comments a little bit, because we want to allow the other, the other side a chance to speak, so I appreciate that. Thank you, sir. Your name is, can you identify yourself, please?
My name is Robert Sledges. Thank you, Mr. Chairman and subcommittee. 37 years ago, my partner and I had to lie on a loan application in order to buy our home. I am also a veteran. I ask you to consider the plight of three types of people. One might be a gay teenager who was kicked out of his home because of his sexual identity. Today, that teenager could be denied entry into a public shelter. The only recourse that individual has is living on the streets and everything that he might experience on the streets. I ask you to consider the plight, like the previous speaker said, about a lesbian sailor or a gay Marine or transgender airman who experience zero discrepancy while they're living on base. Yet when they choose to live off base, can be denied rental of an apartment, the loan for a home, or the ability to buy a home. These are people who risk their lives in order to protect your way of life, to protect your ability to believe what you believe. And you would deny them the basic right of housing if you do not allow them, if you do not remove this level of discrimination from housing. The last set of people I ask you to consider are an elderly gay couple. Consider people who are in their 80s, who've been committed their entire lives, 87 years old, could be denied the ability to move into a retirement community or a nursing home that they may need for their health as a result of this legislation. I ask you to look in your hearts. I ask you to consider that this is 2018 and this type of discrimination just doesn't make sense anymore. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Yes, sir. Can you identify yourself, please?
Mr. Chair, members of the committee, Mike Forehand from the Northern Virginia Chamber of Commerce, also speaking on behalf of the Northern Virginia Technology Council. Our organization supported and open and welcome the Commonwealth, and we are sitting in support of Senate Bill 202, and thanks Senator Abbott for bringing the bill. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Yes, sir. Can you
Mr.
identify
Chairman.
yourself, sir?
Yes, sir. I'm Scott Price. I'm here representing the Alliance for Progressive Virginia. In the last year, we have seen a dramatic rise in discrimination and bigotry across the country, and unfortunately here in Virginia. Passing legislation like this will send a concrete message about where the Commonwealth stands. We support these bills. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Yes, sir.
Good afternoon. My name is Bill Harrison. I'm the Executive Director of Diversity Richmond, the LGBT Community Center here in Central Virginia, and I'm also a gay man. It's against the law to fire someone because they are a Republican. It's against the law to fire someone because they're a Democrat. It's against the law to fire someone because they're Catholic or Baptist. So I ask you, why would it remain legal in Virginia to fire someone because of their sexual orientation or their gender identity? Because being Catholic or Republican is something that you choose. No one chooses their sexual orientations or their gender identities. And if you don't believe that, I ask you, when did you choose yours? You didn't. It was a natural installation of who you are as a human being. And I must tell you, I'm 64 years old, and I've lived in Virginia all of my life. And for years, we had to endure hate-filled legislation against LGBT people introduced by a legislator that by the grace of God, his constituents soundly removed him from office. I had a sigh of relief. And now here we are in 2018, and we're actually debating whether or not it should be legal to fire someone from their job because of who they love? Really?
Thank you, sir. Yes, sir.
Good afternoon. My name is Logan Miller, and I'm currently a graduate student at Virginia Commonwealth University, studying for my Master's of Teaching in Secondary Social Studies Education, with the hopes of teaching government. Actually, Speaker Cox was my government teacher, and he inspired me to pursue my career. I'm here today because I'm deeply concerned with the issue of discrimination against the LGBT community in terms of housing and public employment in the Commonwealth of Virginia. As a future teacher, I feel the issue of whom I love being used as grounds for my termination or refused housing to be unfair and unacceptable in a land it claims to be for lovers. I implore you all to vote to pass these bills on to being read before the full committee. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Will you identify yourself, please?
My name is Caitlin O'Brien. I am a transgender woman from Delegate Yancey's district in Newport News. I have lived there for the last 10 years. I got my degree there. I work at the shipyard as a mechanic for the last 5 years. I've been very fortunate compared to other transgender people in the area that I know, which there are many because there's a very high rate of us actually serving in the military, and a lot of those people also end up working in defense after. I've been very fortunate to have a job. I've been very fortunate to have a home. I've known many people who have been homeless because they have not been as fortunate. I have protections where I work. Not everybody does. They should. It's not an issue for anyone other than me, the fact that I am transgender where I work. It was not an issue for them sending me abroad to work in other states. It was not an issue for my company recognizing me when I helped someone having a heart attack in the plant of one of the aircraft carriers that I work on. It should not be a thing that anyone is discriminated against for their gender identity. It doesn't have any effect on whether we can build warships and bombs in Hampton Roads. And it should not be something that is keeping us homeless, keeping us from just basic things as far as being able to live. And I am asking that you do common sense thing. I don't know who's affected negatively by me as a transgender person living next to them. You know, I'm not gonna sue to live in the same house as them. I'm just want to be able to have an apartment. And anyone and everyone should have the right to live under a roof. I don't know why this is still being debated. This should be a common sense thing. This should already be legislation in place. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, sir.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, Craig Tolson, Home Builders Association of Virginia. We support the bill. We support housing for all Virginians.
Thanks, sir. Yes, sir.
Chip Dixon on behalf of the Virginia Realtors, we likewise support the bills on the housing. Thank you, sir.
Good afternoon. My name is Alita Strickland. I'm from Louisa, Virginia. Nice, small, rural place right down 64. I'm speaking to you both as a parent and as a professional. As a parent of now an adult gay child, we went through the struggles that many families do. I am also a mental health professional. I'm a licensed school psychologist in private practice and have also worked in schools for 25 years. I'm very well aware of the struggles that our youth go through, and I'm here to ask you, as adults who our children look up to make a place for them. If you go to any support group, those kids can tell you that it's legal to discriminate against them. They know that. They're very well aware that they can be fired, that they can't get housing. They know this. They are looking to you as our legislators to make a place for them. Make it illegal to discriminate against them. They want the same things that every child wants: to grow up, get a job, and move out of their parents' house. And as a parent, I can tell you, this is what we all want. We want them to be successful, to get a job and move out. Please don't allow discrimination to continue to be legal. You're not letting them get out of our house. Okay? You're not letting them live their authentic lives. You're not allowing them to live up to their potential. They have so much to contribute to society. Make it a level playing field. And Delegate Peace, to your question earlier, an anecdote that I can share with you is that my child is now an employee of the Department of Defense. As a millennial, they commented to me on how amazing the diversity training was for DOD, and also commented to me on how sad it was that DOD is so far ahead of the Commonwealth of Virginia, a place where we've been born and raised. I hope you all will at least allow these bills out of committee so that the full legislature can act on them. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, ma'am. And as a father of 3, I appreciate the comments. Thank you. Yes, ma'am?
My name is Kathleen Green, delegate. I live in Glen Ellen. I'm a retired registered nurse. I'm a proud grandmother. I'm straight and cisgender. I've been married to my Navy veteran husband for almost 40 years, and I just can't understand why our friends and neighbors would not be entitled to the same exact civil equal rights protections that my husband and I and our children enjoy. I support these bills, and I hope that the Commonwealth progresses.
Thank you, ma'am. You two guys want to speak in opposition? 2 more?
Opposition, no. In support.
In support, okay. Thank you. Just please be brief. I want to give the other folks a chance. So thanks, sir.
Yeah, of course.
Identify yourself, please.
William Luck. I'm a graduate student at the BCU Brand Center down here. We do a lot of extensive research with millennials, Gen Z, Gen X. Those are the ones that are coming after the millennials, and if there's any doubt as to whether or not this is a no-brainer in our culture right now, it is. For millennials, Gen Z, Gen X, we all understand that we're inheritors of great injustice and prejudice. We all understand that not all things are equal in this country, but we aspire for them to be equal. And we understand that our friends and neighbors aren't just our friends and neighbors, but they are citizens who would like to participate in our economy, in our government, and there should be no reason why we would not protect them.
Thanks, sir.
Good afternoon. My name is Marty Rouse from the Human Rights Campaign. We are America's largest organization fighting to protect America's lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender Americans. And we are here to express our support for protections for Virginia's lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender community. As was stated earlier today, some of this legislation has been passed in many states in this country. There are housing protections currently in 20 states and the District of Columbia, including nearby Maryland and even conservative Utah. In fact, the first non-discrimination bill in our country was passed over 36 years ago. It's time to move on. It's time for Virginia to catch up with the rest of the nation. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. At this time, we're going to allow folks who are opposed to this legislation an opportunity to speak. Yes, sir. Can you please identify yourself?
Mr. Chairman, members of the subcommittee, Jeff Caruso with the Virginia Catholic Conference. We're here in opposition to House Bill 401, House Bill 1547, and Senate Bill 423. A fundamental issue here is religious liberty. This bill would apply new categories of sexual orientation and gender identity to housing, contracts, and a vast array of other situations. And by doing so, it could create civil causes of action against faith-based providers based on their sincerely held religious and moral beliefs regarding human sexuality and putting those beliefs into practice. In the housing context, for example, these bills would apply to faith-based colleges that provide housing and also to faith-based charities. I could cite a number of examples within the other contexts as well. Our agencies in our two Catholic dioceses provide vital services in your communities and communities across the state. Just by way of example, Catholic schools, talking about K through 12 as well as colleges and universities, educate over 30,000 students. Catholic charities serve over 80,000 individuals in great need. We cannot sever our beliefs from our services. Our beliefs animate our services. The state's preservation of religious liberty enables us to serve. Please preserve our religious liberty. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Caruso. Yes, sir.
Again, Virginia Assembly of Independent Baptists, and identify with the comments made by Jeff Caruso, but I also like to bring in a point, and I know we don't want to discriminate, and I feel like, why should we have to continue to make a laundry list of individuals that we don't want to discriminate against? We can just say we should not discriminate, stop there and mark everyone else off, because if we keep making a laundry list and we find those get to be preferred over everyone else. Also, since it was mentioned that only 22 states have this in situation, it doesn't seem like there's a majority of states that are in that position, but that's not what rules what we do. But I do still oppose those bills. Thank you.
Thanks, sir, and, let me see.
Thank you, Mr.
Please
Speaker.
identify yourself, I think I recognize you.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, members of the committee, Mr. Chairman, Bill Janis with the Family Foundation, speaking in opposition to all of these bills, 401, 971, 1547. I know one of them's been struck, Senate Bill 202 and 423. The bills basically fall into two types of categories, creating anti-discrimination provisions in housing and in hiring. Some in the public sector, some in the private sector. So I just want to make the general comment against the bills and what we find objectionable about them and why we oppose them. Senator Evans said that most Fortune 500 companies already have policies that protect people in hiring, and that's true. The two largest employers in the Richmond area, Capital One and VCU, not only have very good hiring policies involving these issues, but they also are sponsors of Equality Virginia's annual gala, for example. Most of the largest employers in the Richmond area have already decided who they want to hire and what criteria they're going to use. They're already hiring in large measure based on the qualifications and merits of the applicants for the positions, not based on other criteria. The last 5 governors, Republican and Democrat, over the last 16 years, had a policy against considering sexual orientation in the hiring or firing of state employees. If you look at the Virginia Department of Human Resource Management, which tracks allegations of discrimination, between July 1st of 2009 and 2017, they found there were 12 registered complaints based on sexual orientation, amounting to about 2 a year. Upon investigation, not one of those 12 complaints was deemed to be founded. Okay? The realtors have come up here and told you we're against discriminating against anybody based on sexual orientation or gender identity. The Northern Virginia Technology Council said we don't make decisions about who we're hiring and who we're firing based on sexual orientation. The home builders have told you that we think everybody ought to have a home and we don't take this into consideration when we're building homes for them. Okay? So, you know, Delegate Levine said the majority of Virginians have spoken and they've said live and let live. They are living and letting live today. There's no founded evidence that there's any kind of pervasive discrimination either in hiring and firing in the public or private sector or in housing, lending, purchasing of homes, leasing of homes. Delegate Simon said that there's no reports because it's not actionable. Well, that's mostly true, but not entirely true. There are 3 localities in the Commonwealth of Virginia who have added sexual orientation to their Human Rights Acts, and since 2010, there have been 19 claims filed or grievances filed based on discrimination in housing based on sexual orientation. All 19 were investigated by those. One of those is in Hampton Roads, and they were found to be unfounded. So there is some evidence that there are areas where the local human rights councils have already added sexual orientation to their human rights statutes, and they don't see a pervasive problem with this. Okay, this isn't really about who gets hired and who gets fired, who gets to buy and who gets to lease a house. What this is about is who may sue. And when you add these people, when you add a new protected class on there, onto this list of protected classes in the Fair Housing Act and in these employment acts, non-discrimination acts, what you're doing is you're creating causes of action, right? And let's look at the definition. I don't think Delegate Levine defines sexual orientation, but the other bills before you have two novel definitions inserted into the Code of Virginia that appear nowhere else. The definition of sexual orientation is the actual or perceived heterosexuality, homosexuality, or bisexuality of an individual. Under that criteria, actual or perceived, you have now such an expansive and subjective protected category that every single person in this room right now would probably qualify as a protected person under these acts. And you might say, well, that's great, wonderful, but in practice, this is about now what happens when I call, say, down into Delegate Miari's district, and he's got a constituent that owns 4 beach houses, and I call him the week before the 4th of July weekend, and I say, I want to rent your beach house on the 4th of July. And Delegate Miari's doesn't call me, Delegate Miari's constituent.
I don't own 4 beach houses.
Right. Delegate Miari's constituent, who owns 4 beach houses, doesn't return my phone call.